Growing up, I was primarily raised by my single mother after my father passed away during my youth. I was fortunate to have several positive male figures in my life through my older brothers. Additionally, my father had left us with a considerable life insurance policy, which greatly contributed to my overall positive upbringing. As a 34-year-old man now, I reflect on the impact of these experiences on my life. During my early teens, I was never much of a social butterfly and often found myself glued to my computer. As I progressed into college, this habit became more intense, and I found myself spending a staggering 80% of my time in front of a screen, whether it be gaming, working, or reading. Consequently, I struggled with my physical appearance, and by the time I reached the age of 20, I was quite overweight and unappealing. Due to these factors, I never had much luck with dating and didn't even lose my virginity until I met my ex-fiancée. On top of this, I was raised very religious because my mom became really religious after the death of my father. So I always thought it was a bad idea to play the field. The only thing I had going for me was that I had become somewhat proficient in several coding languages and expanded on these in college. I would not say that I am a good person or coder, but with a little bit of coding knowledge and a lot of creativity, you can create residual income streams. And I had a decent job in IT where I could work from home 3 days a week. By the time I turned 24, I was still struggling with my weight and social status. However, through my mother's Bible study, I was introduced to a woman who would eventually become my ex-fiancée. Despite the 13-year age difference, we hit it off and began dating. She had a 2-year-old son, who quickly became the center of my world and the only thing I truly cared about. It didn't take long for us to become physically intimate, and my years of pretending to save myself for marriage were quickly discarded. To be frank, she was the one who helped me break out of my shell. After meeting my ex-fiancée, I found myself becoming more sociable within a few short months. I took on a fatherly role for her son, and within 6 months of our relationship, she became pregnant. As a devoutly religious person, I proposed to her immediately and was eager to marry before the baby's birth. However, my world was turned upside down when she revealed that she was still legally married to a man who was in prison. Despite this revelation, I wasn't too bothered by it, as she had previously opened up about her troubled past, and I believed that I could be the one to help her overcome it. Regardless, I accepted the situation and supported her as she began the divorce proceedings. Once those were finalized, we planned to marry as soon as possible. After the birth of our child, I felt on top of the world and believed that I had finally found my place in life. I even began to shed the excess weight and spent less time online than ever before. She was always loving and kind towards me, and I believed that we had an open and honest relationship. Little did I know, I was in for a rude awakening. Looking back, there were several warning signs that I was too blinded by love to see. For one, she had confided early on that the only reason she had become involved with my church was to improve her situation, as she was facing probation and pending court cases. Additionally, despite my comfortable 6-figure income and successful side projects, she insisted on keeping her part-time job, which led to my mother assisting with childcare. Lastly, I couldn't help but notice that she knew an unusually large number of people. I couldn't help but wonder how a suburban mom with a secretarial job had over 200 contacts in her phone. Despite our intentions to marry, we kept delaying the wedding due to various reasons, such as sick relatives. However, she did manage to finalize her divorce from the man in prison. Something occurred that snapped me out of her enchantment. She became pregnant for a second time, and this time with twins. We had only been together for 4 years, and now we were about to have 4 children, 2 more than I had ever expected to have. She claimed to have been on birth control, so we were not using condoms anyway. After the birth of the twins, I began consulting with my doctor regarding a vasectomy, which my ex-fiancée supported. Something occurred that broke her hold over me. I decided to have some of my swimmers frozen before the vasectomy, just in case we changed our minds in 5 years. During my appointment, the doctor informed me that my sperm count was low and mostly inactive, but it could be a temporary issue. He suggested that I improve my diet and lifestyle for a few weeks before returning for another test. However, during my second appointment, the same issue arose and the doctors began to investigate the problem. It's no surprise where this is headed. The doctor eventually informed me that I was likely infertile. As it turns out, that statement wasn't entirely accurate, as I have a child whom I know is biologically mine. However, that statement still resulted in the events I previously mentioned. When I informed the doctor that I had 3 biological children, he appeared uneasy and began speaking frantically. I was in a state of shock and didn't fully comprehend what he was saying. I believe I left the doctor's office before the appointment was even over. I didn't even get into my car. I walked aimlessly until it started to get dark and eventually had to call an Uber to take me home. My fiancée was concerned about my whereabouts. I lied to her, claiming that my car had broken down, my phone had died, and I was stranded at the mechanic's shop late into the night, forgetting to inform her. I eventually drifted off to sleep, but the next day, I immediately went online to research similar stories and began to give myself false hope. The first post I came across stated that fertility assessments aren't always accurate, and I should undergo a test to be absolutely sure. I was confident that the test would prove the doctor wrong, but within a week, I received the results and discovered that the children were not biologically mine. The first person I confided in was my mother. I went to her house and broke down in tears for the first time as an adult. She comforted me and then revealed a secret that was never meant for me to know. As it turns out, I am the result of an affair, and my biological father died from a pain medication overdose after discovering the truth. I'm not sure why my mother thought her revelation would bring me comfort, but it only led to an unhealthy perspective on women. After calming down from the news, she urged me to man up and fulfill my commitment to the children, since I was the only father they had ever known. As someone who had always been a pushover, I took her words to heart for about a day before completely losing it. I phoned my fiancée and explained that I had a family emergency and needed to spend the night at my mother's house. Although she offered to prepare dinner for us, I declined. The twins were around 6 months old, and the boys were 2.5 years old and 5 years old, respectively. I can't deny that I felt some affection for these children, but it was difficult to maintain eye contact with them, and I had resolved to no longer be a father figure to them. I knew that my absence would cause them pain and inflict emotional harm, but I couldn't bear to hear them address me as Dad, as it felt like a sharp blade piercing my heart every time. I remained composed and didn't reveal anything to my mother, and she didn't say anything either, presumably because she believed I was taking responsibility. I consulted with a lawyer because I wanted to remove myself from the birth certificates of these children, and I assumed that because we were not married, I could smoothly extricate myself from this situation. Regrettably, after reviewing the legal documents and financial records, it became apparent that since I had intertwined much of our finances and acted as a father figure, I would be responsible for providing child support for the boys, and my ex-fiancée would receive a share of the equity in the house and my side businesses. In fact, the lawyer informed me that I would be giving for about 25% of my income for a significant period. However, I decided to cut ties with my lawyers after paying their initial fee because I was not comfortable with the idea of the state controlling my finances. This marked the beginning of my retaliation. I devised a strategy to vanish and leave them with minimal resources. I commenced by eliminating all of my passive income streams and intentionally getting terminated from my job. Although it was an uncomfortable process, I accomplished my goal of getting fired. To put it simply, I recreated some of the iconic scenes from Office Space, including smashing a printer in the courtyard and sending memes to coworkers while working remotely. I refrained from harming any clients since my boss was a close friend. My colleagues found my antics amusing. I chose not to file for unemployment benefits and instead relied on our savings to sustain myself. In spite of both our names being on all accounts, my ex-fiancée allowed me to manage our finances. She was oblivious to the fact that our account was gradually depleting and that our financial situation was spiraling out of control. I left a few $1,000s in her checking account, but ceased payments on our credit cards, causing an enormous increase in debt. For several months, I contemplated ending it all and following in my father's footsteps, but eventually decided against it. In an attempt to distance my children from my ex, I purchased ancestry test kits for them to determine their biological father. However, the results were even more bizarre than anticipated. The eldest child was either a cousin or half-brother to their siblings, indicating that my ex's brother, who was in prison, may have fathered the child. Moreover, none of the family members identified through the test seemed like a suitable fit, so the investigation came to an end. Feeling repulsed by my mother's actions towards my father and her newfound loyalty to my ex, I made a conscious effort to distance myself from her. I devised a plan to escape everything by disappearing on a hiking trip. I exaggerated the details of my trip, claiming that I would be spending a week alone with my thoughts on the trails. Prior to leaving, I took my 6-year-old out for ice cream and broke down in tears, marking only the second time I had cried as an adult. My emotional outburst caused the 6-year-old to become visibly upset, and he attempted to console me. Although I repeatedly apologized for leaving him, I sensed that he did not fully comprehend the situation. I was primarily afraid of losing him, even though I knew he wasn't my child. Nevertheless, I departed that afternoon and eventually arrived at the lodge where I checked in. I will omit the following portion as it may have legal implications. However, fast forward 6 months, and I had established a new identity and relocated to a different city. I gradually rebuilt my career and was slowly approaching my previous income level. I began to stalk my ex on social media platforms such as Facebook. To be honest, it was somewhat therapeutic. The chaos they experienced while attempting to gain access to my account must have been torturous. Additionally, my ex discovered that our finances were not as stable as they had assumed. Asking for money on Facebook is incredibly distasteful. I will refrain from discussing the legal aspects, but numerous individuals attempted to locate me. I contemplated contacting the police to inform them of my safety, but ultimately decided against it. Although I incurred a substantial penalty, it was a small price to pay. I dedicated a significant amount of time to self-improvement, achieving excellent physical fitness, abandoning my religious beliefs, and embracing a hedonistic lifestyle. I transformed beyond recognition. For approximately a year, I persistently monitored this ex-fiancée activities. Eventually, I learned that she had begun dating a new partner and became pregnant almost immediately. Meanwhile, my mother was still involved in her life and caring for my supposed children, despite her questionable behavior. On the 1-year anniversary of my departure, she created a memorial page for me. This prompted me to realize that my revenge was not yet complete. Consequently, I contacted my brother and informed him that I was still alive. Although my brother and I had grown apart over the last decade, he was still my flesh and blood, and I could always rely on him. I confided in him about my motives and we reconnected, but I requested that he keep it a secret, which he agreed to do. However, he soon revealed that my mother and ex-fiancée were suing my insurance company to receive the payout from my life insurance policy, which had remained active despite its substantial cost. If she were to win, the payout would be in the 7 figures, and she would receive the premiums she had paid since my supposed death. I have no intention of committing insurance fraud, so I began making my preparations. I embarked on a 1,000-mile drive to my former city upon hearing about her impending hearing, blasting Highway to Hell for most of the journey. I arrived at the court early and took a seat. By this time, I had lost 60 pounds, grown a beard, and overall looked much better. I appeared so different that even my fiancé and mother walked right past me without recognizing me. I had anticipated a large courtroom meeting and was already planning to barge in and object, being my usual cringe lord self. Afterwards, they found themselves in a small room with lawyers from the insurance company. Fed up, I decided to take action and knocked on the door repeatedly until it opened. The lawyers were bewildered to see a disheveled man with a beard standing before them. I calmly stated that I believed they were attempting to resolve the matter of my supposed demise. My ex-fiancée recognized me instantly and gasped, while the lawyers remained perplexed. Eventually, we all left the room and chaos ensued, prompting the bailiffs to be summoned. My ex-girlfriend became enraged and struck me, leading the authorities to handcuff her. The incident was significant enough for the insurance company, as their lawyers, boss, and client arrived to gather statements. A detective even made an appearance, causing me to feel uneasy about my decision to come forward. Despite my reluctance, I gave an honest statement, with the exception of being vague about my current residence. I remained in town for nearly a month, residing in a budget motel during what proved to be a tumultuous period. I shared proof of my ex-partner's infidelity with anyone who would listen and attempted to meet with my children. Unfortunately, my youngest child did not recognize me, and my 7-year-old told me to go to hell. While the police were furious, they initiated a civil lawsuit to cover the expenses incurred during their search for me. A detective from another state even flew in to interrogate me. Fortunately, I managed to avoid arrest as I did not want my fingerprints to be associated with my new identity. In the end, I was forced to pay a hefty fine, which I promptly paid in cash, much to the surprise of the police. At that point, I was ready to wash my hands of the entire town. My ex-fiancée served me with a civil lawsuit, and while my mother assisted me, I was already long gone by the time anything came of it. I returned to my new city and have no intention of ever going back. After a few months of sabotaging my ex's insurance plans, I ceased my spying and moved on with my life. This occurred several years ago, and I have since moved on to a better place in my life. However, I am currently feeling fatigued and in need of rest.